God bless you guys. This is Sean here from Faith Brings Change. I just want to come on here, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about, but I do have a lot of revelation God's been showing me, guys. We talk about a lot about end-time prophecy and events because, we're near the end of the age, guys, and we're about to see this, and the Lord wants to prep us for this stuff. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with the book of Daniel, but it talks about in chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, there was like 4 winds striving against a great sea and 4 beasts come out of the sea. Well, the sea is also known as the bottomless pit. You can do research on this, and it's also known as the bottomless pit. Your heart, basically, guys, is like a sea. It can be like a well of marvels, as it says in the Elijah codes, Bible codes, and it can also be like a bottomless pit. And so those 4 kings came out of that those 4 chambers of that. You could say that chambers of that sea, because our heart, guys, it has 4 chambers in it. And so we can conceive these 4 beast kingdoms in our heart, to build them up. And they really make up the heart of the devil, basically. He conceived these 4 out of his heart. Babylon, the king of confusion. He was the king of confusion. And Media Persia, the king of strife and division. That's what he was. Grecia, the king of the people of the gray. Because that's what he was. He taught gray knowledge. He mixed good and evil together and got gray. Like mixing black and white paint in. And that's why the 3rd beast, which is for Grecia, is a leopard. And you can look up for leopard. It actually means spotted, and the Hebrew having to do with black paint dabbled on. And that was interesting because God was always trying to tell me about gray. How you get grays, you mix black paint in with white. A little bit of evil into the good of your life. And you get gray, and then you begin to teach from the gray and say God, they say God is gray. There's even a character on Stephen King novel who also wrote about the Dark Tower representing the Tower of Babel, but and that's connected to this character, this movie, It the Clown. And his alternate ego is Bob Gray. And Bob, actually, if you look it up, the etymology of the word means a signal, basically known as Alice, conventionally known as Alice. So, a gray signal. That's why you have in the Resident Evil movie, 4th one, Afterlife, or something like that. She's on an island, and she's talking through a signal. She says, if anyone's out there, can you hear me? But the devil wants to bring you through into a gray signal, or through that signal, he wants to gather you. And he does it like through Alice. Alice going into that rabbit hole, which is also Babylon, because Babylon also means the gate of God, not only confusion, but the confused gate of God. And so they're going into that gate, and it says the world government, the 1st beast in the book of Revelation, guys, it has the mouth of a lion. And so they're going into that gate of God, like Alice, meaning oath to God. They're making an oath to another God and going into that. And they're coming out and trying to bring other people into that. And this is, and this is the whole thing you have about the Matrix, basically, where they have Alice, follow Alice. Well, the Matrix means a womb. And so the mouth of the lion is also the birthing of the heart, and coming into that evil heart, the devil's heart. And we were talking about this. And guys, when God does prophecies, he speaks on a bigger scale, like when he's trying to talk about, he gave us old things to represent things, basically, that were coming. We had a flood back then to show us a flood that was coming now. You have so many things where this as a duality of interpretation, to interpret this later, that later, that later. And I asked him, and I prayed hard about this. I was like, God, I know you're a God. You're outside of time. So you can see all things. You don't just see one patch you see way more than we do. So I know there's an interpretation. There's a duality of interpretation. This interpretation, the first one, the second is for this, the third is for this. But I said, what's your highest interpretation of these four beasts? And I prayed a long time. And he finally gave me the answer. And he told me, I was dreaming of this. Well, first I want to say, he told me time fell into physics in 3 interpoles. And I didn't know the word interpol existed. This is significant because the second beast is a bear, and it has 3 ribs in its mouth. And he told me that time, therefore, was for that lion that fell into that bear's mouth in 3 parts. And, you know, if you look at Babylon, it was divided into 3 parts at the Tower of Babel. They had 3 intents. And this is what Lucifer did. He's described also as a king of Babylon. They wanted to build up to heaven. They wanted to overthrow God. They want to set up their own gods there. And the god of the gray, Bob Gray, you might say, like it, the clown, you know, the devil was speaking through them, getting to build up the Tower of Babel like he first did when he wanted to conquer the throne of God, and he was cast out, you know. He was cast out of there. A third of his angels were cast out. They're the IT crowd, the information technology crowd. They had information of Lucifer got all the gold, which represents the anointing and knowledge, like the king of Babylon. This confused him to make him think the anointing came from him and not God, and he could be God therefore. And he told them they could become gods, you know, or, you know, he'd give them a better position than God gave them. And so they followed after this king, and he became a beast, you know. And he told me, it's kind of funny, and I'll bring this up in a second, but anyways, he told me basically that lion having that heart, a man's heart given to it, the world gave themselves over to the devil, the king of confusion, the king of Babylon. He's described as the king of Babylon, like Lucifer, who were fallen, you know. He started out perfect. King Nebuchadnezzar's name, king of Babylon, meant like, basically the oracle, or to tell the oracles of God, like a prophet, you know. And he started out perfect, but he brought people down, you know. He brought them down into that rabbit hole. His own mouth, his own word, you know. They believed him instead of God, you know. They went out of the mouth of God, and they went out into the mouth of confusion, the devil. Sorry, guys, I got to get a cough drop right here. I get dry mouth a lot, but anyways, yeah, it's... This is very interesting, guys. He told me the lion represented time, and I was like, whoa. And the lion roars out like you know, a new time, basically a new time. You know, we talked about, you know, or there's the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, and each one is like roaring out, you know, a new time. Each Lion King is like for a new time. I looked up the Hebrew word for lion because I wanted to investigate. You know, you want to just test, you know, test the spirits and test what he's shown you in the dream. And the Hebrew word for lion is a word that means to gather, pluck, or collect. So get this, the lion of time, to gather, pluck, and collect. And we also have 3 representations of time. We have the past, the present, and the future. So he said time fell into physics in 3 interpoles. So if time is a lion, then what is physics? Well, the bear had the lion basically 3 parts of Babylon divided into 3 parts, you know, in its mouth, physics. Basically, the study of how things work. People wanted to know how things work, so they wanted to seize the time. And they took it. They subdued it. And he said time fell into physics in 3 interpoles. And so Interpol is some crime organization, or they investigate stuff. They investigate stuff just like the study of physics, how things work. And there's 3 interpoles. There's terrorism, cybercrime, and organized crime. So terrorism, we want to build up to heaven, you know, getting over everybody, to reign over them in terror. We want to set up our own gods. That's cybercrime. You set up your own gods in the heart of people because, guys, cybercrime is like a computer. Sorry if I'm going too fast for you guys. That's just a lot of revelation. But basically, your human brain is like a computer. And the demons want to get in your mind. After they put terrorism over you, then they get in your mind. You start thinking of how bad things are. You get controlled. You get manipulated to do evil. they do evil through you, you know, to try to protect yourself from evil. You end up doing evil, you know, and that's cybercrime, and then organized crimes, you know. So they set up gods in your heart and your mind, basically. That's cybercrime, and through those they commit crimes. Those gods in you commit crimes through you, those demons. And then organized crime. They want to get you to organize, you know, people that, like, if they can take control of a person like a leader, they can get a church. You see what I'm saying, guys? Organized crime. And this is how the devil has taken over much of the church. But you're a new subscriber on here. I saw, I can't remember what it was. You mentioned Joseph. I can't, forgive me, brother or sister in the Lord. I can't remember your name, but you just subscribed to this channel. It seems odd me teaching on a lot of this stuff. You know, God told me, you know, I've told this to the guys before, you know, January 28, 2021. He told me I was the end time Elijah. Jesus whispered that to me. Looking right at me, and it wasn't something that just started. He stirred me up to do a work, write this book of Harvest, and to write other books, which I'm writing right now. Because he told me that, and he cast me in the belly of the well of Jonah, and he told me that Revelation 9 is the sign of Jonah and the sign of the Son of Man, that we're gonna, basically, Jonah went into the well, the Son of Man went 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The whole world is going to be in darkness in Revelation 9 and 3 days. Say only the Israelites who overcome their sin, or if they're found out of sin at that time, then he will protect them. And you mentioned Joseph because it's interesting. I have a calling, you know, he called me by that name of Joseph, and I'm trying to store up the words of God, grain, because he gave me a 7-year time limit of plenty before a 7-year famine, which probably is a great tribulation coming up. But I don't know that, you know, but I'm storing up right now, you know, and walking by the faith of the Lord. I know what he told me, and I know in Elijah codes, when I looked him up, it said he will be a twin. And, you know, I'm a twin. You know, my sister's name is Alicia, actually. Talking about Alice, oath to God, so we need to get Alice out of that well, make her into a new Alice. Make her not into a gray signal like Bob Gray, you know, a signal known as Alice, but a pure signal. And red is the color for pure, and I'm just remembering a dream I had where I saw another Alice in a red dress, you know. So that's interesting. But anyways, these are a lot of revelations, but the word for bear, which I told you represented our physics, because this bear kingdom of Media Persia swallowed up, it had 3 divisions. It did take Babylon, it took Lydia, it took Egypt, but those are really like the 3 parts of Babylon, you know, in a way. Because Babylon means confusion. Lydia means a twisted almond tree. An almond tree is an awakening, so a false awakening. So that's really also confusion, Babylon. And then you got Egypt, bondage. They're going there to get delivered. But also, guys, when Joseph reigned over Egypt, it was different. It was like people being in bondage to the Lord. They would have to come to him to get grain, and Pharaoh represented God. But when he was gone, now it represents bondage to Satan, and that's why they were taken over, you know. And he told me on the cross, Jesus is the Prince of Peace. It says he's given us a spirit of peace, and not a spirit of confusion. But when they killed Jesus, they turned him into the king of Babylon. He was representing a dead king. They don't want a living king to reign over them. They want a dead king. And so they hated a living king. They hated him while he lived, but they loved him while he died. Like, yeah, he's dead, you know, and they were cheering him. And he had confusion when there was 3 hours of darkness on the cross, you know, and he was saying, you know, my Father, why have you forsaken me? So he became the king of confusion to represent the fall of the people, that this is what they wanted. They wanted to follow a king like this, and this was what happens when you follow sin, and he took on the sin of the world, you know. And he went down there 3 days, and he came back. And so that star that falls in Revelation 9 represents the fall of the king of Babylon. It also represents the fall of Jesus when he's coming down to burn up the earth with fire in 7 years, you know. And And Paul also saw his great light, and he was struck down on the Damascus road 3 days. Paul blinded somebody else. They were blind 3 days. There was 3 days of darkness in the land of Egypt. So, and even in the days of Joseph, you can read about in Jasher or somewhere, when he was captured, thrown in the pit, the Ishmaelites were abusing him, and God put darkness on them, and there were scorpions. And there were scorpions on the stingers of those locusts that come out of the bottomless pit. And, Revelation 9. And so this is a lot of revelation, and a lot of times I get sensory overload. Forgive me. It's just I'm studying a lot of this stuff because I'm trying to teach on it, and it's not easy. But the bear kingdom of Media Persia, representing physics, I looked up the word for bear, and it means to whisper. So how things work is like a whisper, a secret, you know. Media Persia wanted to know how Babylon was so successful, so it beat Babylon down and wanted to gain the knowledge of it. And then he told me the third kingdom, which is of Grecia, the people of the gray, he said that represented gray matter. So you got time, Babylon, you know, a confusing time. You got physics, basically that bear means to whisper in the Hebrew. You got Media Persia, meaning strife and division. How things work, you know how bad things are. And then you got gray matter. Gray matter is like something that makes up part of your brain, and it has to do with your senses, your feelings, your impulses. In other words, the flesh. And that makes up 60% of your brain. You got another 40%, or it might be the other way around, but you got white matter, which has to do with your heart rate and your blood pressure. That's the essential. That's like the spirit, you know, really keeping ourselves alive, keeping our heart rate, we want to have the blood of Christ in our lives. But people were running after the senses and feelings instead, the gray matter in their life, you know, and that's what's killing them. And, you know, Alexander the Great, you know, he broke his kingdom up into 4 divisions after he fell. You know, he was poisoned, poisoned his wine when he was drinking it, and he died. So he was the king of Grecia. You know, they were all about their kingdom, that they don't value good and evil, but they value strength. So if good is strong one day, they will follow it. If evil is, they will follow it. And so I'm remembering a story of this time in Babylon when on the book of Jasher, where Abraham was being judged for resisting the gods. He destroyed these statues of his father, Terah. His father took him to the king of Babylon, or Babel at that time. You might say a Nimrod, which means to rebel. And Nimrod was judging him. Nimrod was going to throw him into the furnace of fire. And his brother, Abraham's brother Haran, said, I'm going to follow Abraham if he's strong enough, if his God is strong enough. But if Nimrod's gods are strong enough, I'll follow them. So he was like, he had that gray matter mentality. They don't value what is good or evil. They value who is the strongest. And so when they were both cast in, because Terah's father told the king of Babylon, that it was Haran, his son's idea, to keep Abraham alive. Because when Abraham was born, Nimrod wanted to kill him. But Terah, his father, loved him and hid him. And so when Terah brought him to the judgment seat of Nimrod, it was discovered that Abraham was a child that he wanted to destroy all those years ago. But what happened is Terah took one of his servants, or the sons of his handmaids, and brought him to him, and they smashed his head against a rock, and so Abraham lived. And so when Nimrod found out about this, he told Terah, Abraham's father, who told you to do this? And Terah, Abraham's father, said, it was my son, Haran, which is Abraham's brother. And so Abraham's brother said, I'll follow Abraham if his God is strong enough, but I'll follow these other gods of Nimrod, if they are strong enough. And so since Nimrod thought that it was Haran that put his dad up to it, Terah, you know, to save Abraham, he threw both Abraham and Haran in the fire together. It says that he was in the furnace for 3 days straight, and Haran burned up because his heart was not perfect with God, but Abraham didn't burn up. You know, and this is where later on God repeated the duality of that in the days of Daniel, you know, with those 3 Hebrew children, and you can see the pattern of this, guys. So it's very interesting how God does repeats on all this stuff. But, you know, and the third kingdom was the people of the gray. But these are some of the revelations that God is showing me. I know this stuff. It's very interesting, guys. It's kind of dark, but God is basically telling you what you need to resist in your life. You know, that like that Bear Kingdom of Media Persia, the study of how things work, you know. Solomon, I can't remember what he said, much learning comes much sorrow and grief, you know, and everything. And that Bear Kingdom, you know, bears want to get fat for the winter and store up all that stuff. And he said it's like physics, the study of knowledge, trying to hoard all knowledge to itself. But when you do that, you get good and evil, and that will kill you. And then that raises up the people of the gray. They don't care about how things work. They care about who's the strongest. They don't want you to find out their sin and study it out. And so Grisha stamped out Media Persia, you know, after it took and conquered Egypt, which is bondage. And that's hitting pretty close to home for Grisha. And Grisha, the king of Grisha, died in Babylon. He died in confusion. He came from the west, the same place where the king of Babylon was, you know. They were at rest and flourishing in their palace, you know. But the king of Babylon said it was his strength that did all this, and that's why he lost it. He told me those 2 wings of that lion of Babylon represented sense and nonsense. That over time, as a lion, those 2 wings collected. And it lifted him up above the earth, and people were worshiping time as the king of Babylon instead of the person who created the time. He turned time into confusion. And, you know, speaking of the king of Babylon, it has to do with the Tower of Babel because God confused their languages. And, you know, that's why the world government has the mouth of a lion. Speaking of that language, time has a language, and its language are numbers, guys. Its language are numbers. And, you know, I don't know if you can see this right here. It's 8:01 right now, but 8's the number of circumcision, and there's a cutoff time. There's a time when God's going to wrap everything up, guys. You know, he's going to do that. And one day, the day of the Lord, you know, he's going to wrap everything up. There will be time no longer declared. And the person that declares that, of all things, he has a roar like a lion, you know, and he cries with a great voice. And so it really makes you think, guys. But anyways, I love you guys. I'm praying for you. Just seek the Lord and everything. And he's so gracious, guys, with his knowledge. You know, I don't deserve to have any of the least bit of what he shows me. But just seek him, guys, and seek holiness. And he's going to protect you from everything. But I love you guys. I'm praying for you. Until next time, shalom.